I own myself. Nobody else owns me, and therefore nobody else has a right to dictate to me, how safe I have to be out in my car.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Clair.
Welcome back, my Liberty Lions, to another edition of the Lions of Liberty podcast, your home for great conversations about the ideas of liberty. And I've got another one coming for you in today's episode, the 272nd episode of this program, which means you can find today's show notes featuring links to everything we discuss over at lionsofliberty.com/272. And I know many of you out there are facing major healthcare decisions, especially right now with the open enrollment period for 2017 having just begun. I want to encourage you to check out today's sponsors, Health Excellence Select. They have set up the ultimate free market, affordable alternative to Obamacare that you absolutely must check out. Learn more at lionsofliberty.com/health. My guest today is an automobile expert who has authored 2 books, Automotive Atrocities and Road Hogs. He doesn't just write about cars, but also politics from a libertarian perspective as well over at his website, EPAutos.com. I am pleased to welcome Mr. Eric Peters. Eric, are you ready to roar?
When my teeth are better, I'll try and do it better, but yes, I am.
I never heard a lion look in the mirror and check his teeth out before unleashing the roar.
Oh, I'm a toothless lion today because I had a cap done, so I've got a temporary. My gums are killing me, so pardon me if I'm somewhat mush-mouthed. That's why.
Well, you sound great to me, and you know what? Roaring, it's not about if your teeth work or if your mouth can get the sound out the right way. It's about the spirit, and I'm pretty sure you got that spirit either way.
I think so.
Great, Eric. Well, we'll get into your ideas about politics and how you became a libertarian in a little bit, but I kind of want to start off first how you took interest in the subject that you're so passionate about, and that is cars.
Well, like a lot of guys, I'm a Gen X guy, so a lot of guys my age grew up messing with cars when we were little, and that just sort of grew and developed. And as I got into the workforce and became a journalist and started working at newspapers, I got the opportunity to cover local car shows and write about the industry. And apparently I did an okay job at it because they asked me to do more. One thing led to another, and I just kind of segued into full time. And so I've been doing that for, more than 20 years now. So I've been able to combine my passion, which is cars and motorcycles, and also my living, which is something that I'm very grateful for being able to do.
How exactly were you able to do that? Because I know there are so many people out there that, and this applies very broadly in many areas, but many people out there that have passions, have things that are hobbies that they spend so much time on, but then they go over to their 40-hour-a-week job that has nothing to do with that, and they're bored out of their minds. So how were you able to get to that point where you were able to, start writing about cars and work your way into the point where you could actually make a living off your passion?
Well, part of it, had to have been timing. I'm not going to take all the credit for it. I got into it in the 90s, and back then, it was analogous to the NFL. There were a few hundred slots in the entire country for people who were actually making money writing about cars or covering the car industry. And at that time, I was on the editorial page staff at the Washington Times in Washington. And I was able to get into it from, leverage it from a position of relative strength as somebody who worked for a fairly significant news outlet. And, today everything's kind of fractured and diversified, and there are thousands of people blogging. So I was able to kind of build up my name recognition and my career and everything before all of that. So I often fall down on my knees and thank God I'm not a millennial.
So you were blogging before blogging was cool.
I guess so, yeah. It was a combination of hard work and luck. I'm not going to deny the luck being a big factor in it.
One thing I want to ask you about is your book here, Automotive Atrocities, Cars We Love to Hate. I just love that title. So what's that book all about, and what inspired you to write it?
Well, it's about the cars that nobody makes anymore, meaning just crap cars, junkers, cars that were atrocities from the factory, that were poorly designed and poorly built. There's no such animal today. Kids coming up today have no idea what it was like to go to a new car showroom and find something like a Yugo that literally would fall apart in your hands, brand new, that would begin to burn oil copiously after 10,000 miles. That was a death trap that had, profound structural and design flaws that could get you killed. There's just no such thing anymore. And some of them were just outright hilarious. one of the trends today that I often complain about is the homogenization of car design that's due to a great extent because of the government laying down all these mandates about what cars have got to have, and that kind of sets up a template that everybody's got to fit their cars into. But 30, 40, 50 years ago, manufacturers could really just kind of do what they wanted, and that resulted in some really oddball creations, like the Pacer, for example, and the big fins and the cars of the 60s and all of that, when there really was a big difference between one model and another car company's model. And I look back on that with nostalgia. That was fun and interesting and entertaining.
That's really interesting that you point out that cars today are a lot more homogenous in their design, because I'm actually, as we talked about when we set up the interview, I'm kind of in the market for a new vehicle right now. I've been out test driving some cars, and I'm kind of looking at cars in the same area, the same class. And I think the hardest part about my decision now is that so many of the cars feel the same. I'm getting into Hyundais and Toyotas and Nissans and Hondas that are all in the same general area, and I like different things about how they ride and things like that. There are minor differences, but in many ways, I kind of feel like I'm just getting into the same car that has a different name on it.
Well, you kind of are. I'll give you one very specific example. Almost all of the engines that you'll find under any car today, regardless of the brand, are fundamentally the same layout. There are a handful of exceptions. Subaru still sells, for example, the horizontally opposed Boxer engine, but you won't find an air-cooled engine like you'd find in an old Volkswagen Beetle. They've had to make them common and similar, and in part, again, because of the government mandates, particularly having to do with emissions control, that eliminated air-cooled engines. That's the reason why both Volkswagen and Porsche went away from their air-cooled designs. They weren't able to get those cars through the smog test, so they had to go to water cooling. And, just across the spectrum, in order to make these cars legal for sale, they have to make them increasingly the same. And that's why when you go out there and look at them, it's kind of hard to tell one from another. You look at the badge and the grille, and that's basically the big difference between one car and another these days.
So it really seems like your focus on the auto industry has kind of made you privy, maybe more so than the average man on the street, of how government interventions can really influence an industry. I'm kind of curious, how much did your interest in cars and seeing this stuff kind of unfold influence your political beliefs? How connected is your love of cars and your passion for the ideas of liberty?
Well, part of it, let's say it's a big question, so let's kind of break it down a little bit. That's what we're here for,
the big ones.
Yeah. For me, cars were always about, freedom. If you can remember what it was like to be a teenager, one of the big moments in a teenager's life is when you get your driver's license and you start to drive. You've got freedom of action. You can get away from your parents. You can go out with your friends. You can do what you want to do. You can go where you want to go on your own timetable. That was one of the things that greatly appealed to me about cars. I also liked the idea that you could work on this thing. It was just an interesting machine. You could take it apart. You could figure out how it worked. You could put it back together. And as a kid, you could develop the sense of mastery and competence, that you understood something. Today, on the other hand, cars have become very nanny-ish, again, because of the government and the government decreeing all of these safety mandates that every car company has to comply with. So they're a lot less fun. They're a lot less approachable, too, because of all the technology that is necessary to implement all of these safety things that they put into cars. And so they're a lot less interesting to today's kids. And I think that's one of the big reasons why not just the millennials, but the generation behind them have kind of fallen out of love with cars and don't really care about them anymore. They're more interested in video games than they are in cars. And probably, in a way, it's because the car has become a kind of a video game, just a really forbiddingly expensive one.
And one with some serious consequences if you mess up, I guess, out there on the road.
Well, not as much as it used to be, though. In a way, it's ironic. Today's cars are allegedly safer because of all of the, in my opinion, idiot-proofing that they put into these things to prevent people from bearing the consequences of not being attentive, of not allowing enough of a following distance between the car in front of them, ABS braking, and so on. Whereas in the past, you had to really be aware of your driving and you had to pay attention to the road, and that necessarily made you a better driver. When I grew up, and most people my age, and certainly people in the generations that came before, generally they learned to drive on a stick shift, in a stick shift car. And that also tended to make you a better driver because you had to learn how to, move your legs and move your arms and at the same time pay attention to the road. Today, almost all cars have automatics. Manuals are very hard to find in cars today. And you get in the car and you push the button, you turn it on, and you go. And it's deceptively easy to drive. You can whip down the road at 80 or 90 miles an hour in any modern car, and it feels like nothing. I have an old muscle car from the 70s. You take my old muscle car out, And at 60 or 70, you're very aware of the speed that you're going.
That's a really interesting perspective. I never really thought about it that way, that, when you install all these features, and many of them may help people, but at the same time, we have to look at the other side of that when you're training people to be, not really thinking about the road and thinking about driving because they're relying on their vehicle to do all this stuff. They're relying on their vehicle to think for them. And I think, obviously we're seeing a lot of news about self-driving cars and that kind of thing. We're at a point soon where people are literally not going to think about the road at all because they're just going to get in their car and press a button and, I guess it's going to take them off.
There's this whole kerfluffle right now with the self-driving cars. On the one hand, the idea is, okay, you're going to get in your self-driving car, and the car is going to take you where you want to go, and you're not going to have to pay attention to anything. But then at the same time, you're supposed to intervene when the car has a hiccup and doesn't notice that somebody just turned left in front of you. It's a catch-22. You're either the driver or you're not, I think. You either have to be the person who's responsible for controlling the car or not. I don't see how there's a middle ground there. A person who is using this technology to not pay attention can't be expected to pay attention. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can almost analogize it in a way to a trend that we've seen in sports over the years where, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you'll watch clips of football and they're wearing those little leather helmets and then it's people are just tackling each other and what have you. But everyone has to be cognizant of that fact because you can't bang your heads together if you have nothing protecting them. And now fast forward to today, everyone's got these fancy helmets. They're doing all these studies on new helmets they can build for these players to prevent concussions. But what these helmets do is they let people give the idea that, oh, it's okay, we can just ram our heads into each other now because we've got these helmets. Sure. Or you can look at the same thing in boxing. I mean, you got these big gloves on. Yeah, why not just wail on each other? It's not going to hurt your hands. Maybe it's not a perfect analogy, but I kind of do see some similarities there that when you add all these supposed safety features, it can actually cause more reckless behavior.
Yeah, and there's also, with these cars that drive themselves, there's this presumption that I find remarkable that technology is infallible. The argument is, well, we can't trust people to drive cars because people err, they make mistakes, they don't pay attention, they do stupid things. Well, technology fails too. Machines fail. Computers, think about, your computer that sits on your desk. How often does it develop a bug? Probably fairly often. And it's in your house. It's sitting on your desk. It's not being jostled around in a car. It's not subjected to extremes of heat and cold, and it's not moving. It's one thing to make an autonomous car that operates pretty well as a demonstration project, call a press conference, have the media come out, people get in it and try it and drive it around. Well, what happens when it's got 80 or 90,000 miles on it and it's been on the road for 4 or 5 years? Something's gonna go wrong. And the problem is, when something does go wrong, if the driver has been conditioned and told, hey, you don't have to be responsible for anything. You can watch a video, you can take a nap, you can work on your laptop, you can text, whatever it is that you feel like doing, and then something goes wrong, well, the results of that are not going to be good.
Sure, especially if we do get to that point where, like you said, someone could be on their laptop sending an email when suddenly a car juts out and they have to take control of the vehicle. Well, you probably aren't going to have the response time if you are 100% distracted and in no way focused on the road. It almost seems like if we're going to have these self-driving cars, it needs to be in a totally separate road system, a system where there are no human driving cars. And even that, I'm sure, has many potential problems.
Well, I think so too, and that's where you get into the political and philosophical stuff. I've been accused of being a Luddite, and I'm not. I'm all for technology. What I'm opposed to is forcing it. And what I worry about with this autonomous driving stuff is that they're going to decide that, well, in order for this to work, everybody's got to have it, and that means that you can't drive a car that does not have autonomous driving technology. You have to turn in your pre-autonomous driving car. I can see that happening, and that very much concerns me because, they call them self-driving, but that's kind of a misnomer. Somebody's going to be driving the car, just not you. It's going to be the person who controls the programming, which more than likely is going to be somebody in the government, and that makes my flesh crawl. I don't like that at all.
No, that's a scary one indeed, especially for libertarians like us to think. So how much does the government actually affect the programming? I never really thought of it that way. When it comes to these self-driving cars, are they directing, exactly how some of the software needs to be written or exactly what it needs to do? What exactly is the role?
Well, they're hashing it out. They're hashing it out, but they will. That's how it will ultimately be determined. The manufacturers, that is the car companies, aren't going to on their own determine the programming. They're going to do it according to what DOT and NHTSA decree. So, people have, in my opinion, been bamboozled into thinking, well, this is going to be great. We're going to live in a Jetsons-like world where we'll be whizzing along at 100 miles an hour and we'll get to work so much faster. I don't think so. I think that it will be determined by the least common denominator. And if you can imagine a world in which your vehicle operates precisely in accordance with the law, all the underposted speed limits, think about that, and all the granny-ish preemptive slowing down and braking for no reason, waiting pointlessly at lights rather than making a safe turn, and so on. I think that's the kind of world that we're headed toward. I think your self-driving car is going to be like going for a ride in a Greyhound bus, and we all know how enjoyable that is.
Oh God, that is a tough sell, because that's about the last method of transport I want to take at this point in my life.
I mean, think about anything that the government has its hand in, anything that the government controls. Is it generally more efficient? Is it generally more pleasant, or less?
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'm going to go less.
Yeah.
Amazing. Hey, going back to the Yugo and what you mentioned before about how they used to put out just these awful cars. Sometimes they'd make it to market, and I think there's a lot of people that on the progressive side, the more pro-government side of things, that would say, well, you see, that's why we need the government to be out there with these standards, because otherwise they're going to put out these death traps and people are just going to be dying all over the road. So, I mean, what you talked about the Yugo yourself, and maybe you could use that example. Like, how does a car like that even get to market in the first place? And how would the free market, as opposed to government, be able to address problems like that and stop all the death and destruction on the road?
Well, first of all, you got to realize that back in the Yugo era, every car was a piece of junk by modern standards, and that goes for the high-end luxury stuff too. If you were to go back in time and pluck a brand new Cadillac or an Oldsmobile or anything like that out of a showroom and bring it today and compare it to the humblest economy car, the humblest Hyundai you could find, you would find that it's inferior in every respect. They were slapped together. The manufacturing techniques were inferior, and it had nothing to do with the government. It has to do with just improvements in manufacturing, the process of technology getting better over time, and these things would have happened regardless. I'm always amazed that some people believe that absent government telling us we have to have safety, we wouldn't have it. Well, that's just not true. Volvo, for those who can remember, built an entire car company on safety. And they did it starting back in the 1950s and into the 60s, when they were the first car company to include seatbelts as standard in their cars, and they built their cars to a much higher standard in terms of their physical crashworthiness than other manufacturers. That's what they sold the cars on. They were stolid, boring, but they were very safe. But you had the alternative. If you wanted something that was less expensive, if you wanted something that was lighter, that got better gas mileage, that was cheaper, you could go out and buy a Volkswagen Beetle or a Datsun B210 or some other thing. The problem that these progressives have is that they want everybody to be driving Volvos, everybody to be driving a car that's safe as they define it, which frankly is none of their business. You can make an argument, I think, for something like the tailpipe emission standards up to a point, because in principle, at least, what comes out of the car's tailpipe does affect other people. And so that's a valid argument. But how is my safety as an adult human being anybody else's business? If I wish to drive a car that might be a bit less crashworthy, let's say, if I pile into a tree, that's my business ultimately, because I own myself. Nobody else owns me, and therefore nobody else has a right to dictate to me, how safe I have to be out in my car.
Eric, in just a minute, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit about how you approach shopping for a new car, as I am right now. But first, I need to take a minute out to help my listeners shop for an alternative to their health insurance. And guys, I have purchased my own health insurance for the last decade, and I saw firsthand how prices just skyrocketed after the implementation of Obamacare. Suddenly, I found myself with huge premiums, huge deductibles, and being told that I have to buy this specific insurance or I'm going to get fined. I realized right away that this was a scam and that I needed to seek an alternative. And I found that alternative in the concept of health sharing. This is an amazing legal alternative to Obamacare that allows people to share medical expenses with people of similar values. For most people, health sharing is a much more affordable option, and it's a lot less taxing on your soul than that corporatist Obamacare health insurance. And our friends at Health Excellence Select have put together the ultimate package to help you manage your health care. You can learn more by heading over to lionsofliberty.com/health or giving my rep, Jeff Cantor, a call. He can be reached directly at 440-283-6849. Be sure to tell him Lions of Liberty sent you. Now, Eric, as we discussed a little bit before the show, I am currently in the market for a new vehicle. I've been out there shopping around, doing some test driving. So I'm curious, what is your approach to shopping for a new vehicle? First of all, I mean, what is the best way to start this process? I mean, for me, I've just been kind of test driving and not putting too much pressure on myself. I don't need a new car tomorrow or anything like that. But obviously, once you walk into that dealer, you can tell them you're not looking to make a purchase tomorrow all you want, but they're trying to close within 5 minutes. So how would you first start to approach this process?
Well, first of all, buying a new car generally is not the best financial decision. You're almost always better off financially getting a used car just because of the fact of depreciation, regardless of the car that you're looking at, whether it's a blue chip car like a Toyota or something that's a bit less blue chip. Whatever you buy today will probably be worth 30 or 40% less than what you paid for it after about 4 or 5 years, and that's substantial. And at the same time, the quality and durability of almost any modern car is so good that even with 50, 75,000 miles on it, it's effectively still barely broken in. So if you were to buy one that's a few years old and has the mileage on it, you can save yourself a very, very large sum of money. Now, that said, the big advantage to buying the new car is that you don't have to worry about the car, which you do when you buy a used car, meaning that it's a new car, so there's nothing wrong with it. It's brand new. And if there is something wrong with it, it's not going to be your problem. It will be covered under the warranty. You won't have to pay for it. So you can focus on the price of the car. Whereas with a used car, you always have to worry as much about the car itself as you do about how much you're going to pay for it. So I think that's something very important to know. As far as saving money on a new car purchase, one thing that I always advise people is to never, ever, ever go shopping for an all-new model, meaning one that has just been redesigned or just been brought out to market, because the market is going to be driving the price of that up because it's popular and trendy, and you're probably going to pay not only sticker price, you're probably going to wind up paying more than sticker price. So your best bet is to wait a year or two until the hubbub has died down a little bit and there's inventory of those cars at the dealership. And at that point, you're in a more advantageous position to haggle and negotiate on the car. That's number one. The second thing you've already touched on is to never be in a hurry. People who wait until their old car suffers some kind of catastrophic failure, the transmission blows up, something like that, and they just have to get a car. They know, God, I have to get a car this weekend because I'm not going to have any way to get to work on Monday. Those people are in a very disadvantaged, bad position when they go in to discuss the car. And the salespeople can sense that, and they're going to get you. So don't be in a hurry. Don't shop for the trendiest, newest cars. And have your financing lined up before you shop, too. That's something a lot of people don't take into consideration. Go to your bank, your credit union, get all that stuff handled so that you don't get distracted by that when you're talking to the salesman. And lastly, never discuss your trade if you have one, if you're going to bring a trade in. Never discuss that until after you've closed on the price of the new car.
And why is that?
Well, because, again, it's an opportunity for confusion. What they typically will do is get you to focus on your trade-in, and they will give you what seems to be a very generous and may be a very generous offer on your trade, and you'll feel really good about that, probably so good you won't notice that you just paid too much for the new car. That's how they make it up.
So there might be discounts that you could have already gotten through the negotiation process if you had not brought up the trade, but instead they'll just use that trade as sort of to factor in a discount that they might have given you anyway, but now you're also giving them your car.
Yeah, you got to, a salesman, a car salesman, and I'm not disparaging them, but this is their living. This is what they do. Every single day they do these transactions. Most of us only do these transactions once every few years, and we never really become expert at it. So you're at a disadvantage when you go in there. You're like an average guy in the street getting into a ring with a competitive boxer. You're probably going to lose. You don't want to fight the guy directly. So it's really important to not try to do two things at once, meaning trying to worry about, okay, well, what am I going to get on my trade? And then how much am I going to pay for the car? Do one thing at a time, finish the first thing, and then go on to the second thing.
And when it comes to that haggling and negotiating, what other strategies would you suggest? I mean, would you suggest not even trying to talk about price when you first go in there, just look at cars and kind of walk off almost like a disinterested customer? I mean, that's sort of the tactic that I'm taking right now because, like you said, I'm in that position where I don't need a new vehicle, so I have all the power because I can also spend $0. So to me, I'm looking at everything through. I have a paid off car where I can spend zero, so I really need to be sold by the dealer in order for them to sell me on the car.
Well, I recommend doing both. I think that everybody should go and physically look at the car and ideally take it for a test drive and also test drive competitor vehicles and get a sense of the car so that you know what you want. But then go back home, get on the computer, and do your research and find out what the car's sticker price is, find out what the dealer invoice price is, find out what the costs for the various options and trim packages and all of that are. And then add all that up and find yourself what that price is, and then add about 3%, which is a reasonable profit margin for the dealer to make off of the invoice, not the sticker. And then email all the dealers in your geographic area and maybe even cast the net a little wider and just say, hey, I'm interested in buying a new Camry XE and, list the colors and all, and I'm willing to pay X. Are you willing to do business? And then leave it alone and see how many responses you get. That way you don't have to confront them in person. A lot of these people will send you something back and say, well, we can sell you the car for that. Come on down and see us. And then go down and see them. Pit them against each other. That's market economics in action. And it's a great way to maximize your time and maximize your effort by just sitting at your computer and sending out emails.
Sure, and I guess you're maybe a little less likely to be influenced by their effective sales tactics that they've developed over the years and years. If you're not sitting there in front of them, if you're just sitting behind your computer, you have a little more resistance.
Of course, because you're not being swayed emotionally, you're not being pressured. We're human beings, and we all want to, be friendly, and you don't want to be confrontational. And it's very, very difficult to manage that for most people when you're in that setting in a dealer and you're sitting in front of somebody or standing there talking to somebody. You don't want to get the guy mad.
They just told you how they have 3 kids and, maybe
sure.
Make some more money for their Christmas presents. There could be a little bit of a sob story in there, too.
Of course. The thing is just to be reasonable about it. A lot of people make the mistake of being unreasonable and think that they should get a car for less than the dealer, spent to get the thing from the manufacturer. They may not realize that a dealer is essentially a franchise like McDonald's. The dealer pays the manufacturer. Like, for example, you go to a Ford dealer. That Ford dealer has paid Ford Motor Company to represent Ford vehicles. He buys the cars from Ford on loan. He takes out loans to buy the inventory, and then he has to sell the cars. The cars are actually his. They don't belong anymore to Ford. And he's got floor costs, and he's got interest costs and all of those things, and he's got a right to make money. The question is how much. And generally, the rule is about 3%, unless it's a very popular, high-demand model. And, of course, in that case, all bets are off. They'll make as much money as they can. But it's not reasonable to come in there with an offer that is below invoice, in effect demanding that they sell you a car at a net loss or without any profit. They're entitled to make a living just like anybody else.
Is that invoice price, that dealer invoice price you mentioned, is that something readily available? Because obviously they're not going to put that on the sticker where they have the MSRP and all that stuff. But how can someone find out exactly what those invoice prices are?
These days it's incredibly easy. It used to be that you'd have to subscribe to something like a Consumer Reports would publish it. Now you can just go online and get it almost anywhere. Literally Google it. Select your make and model, and then type in dealer invoice price, and multiple search engine results will come up and tell you what that is. It's readily available. The window sticker technically is the MSRP, and that acronym stands for Manufacturer's Suggested Retail Price. Emphasis on suggested. So, that includes all the markup. That includes what they hope to make. It does not necessarily at all reflect what the cost of the vehicle was to the dealer. The invoice price reflects that. In fact, it's padded a little bit because each dealer also gets incentives from the manufacturer that aren't public that you don't know about. So even if you were to buy the car at say 1% over invoice, the dealer is still making money.
So essentially, this is a battle for the dealer to get as much above that invoice price as possible versus the consumer who's trying to get as close to that invoice price as possible.
Sure, and I mean the upside. Some people don't like haggling. I understand that it's not a pleasant thing, but the upside is you really can get a great deal.
Well, that was the idea behind the Saturn, wasn't it? That you don't haggle, you just come on in, you buy them, and where's the Saturn now? It seems
and it didn't work,
right?
Because
like
basically
really
it was basically no haggle was okay. Come in and pay full price. New haggle. I mean, it was a polite way of saying you come in and pay what we tell you to pay.
Right. And we also see that now with some of these services like TrueCar and things like that. Do you know anything about those? Do you think that those generally offer good deals, or is it better to do your method, the shopping around, emailing, and things like that? Or can TrueCar actually save you time to get to sort of a similar place?
I have not done my due diligence on TrueCar, so I can't say anything pro or con about them. I think that if you take a little bit of time as a consumer, as a buyer, to research and use some of the methods that you and I have just talked about, you'll generally do well. You're not going to get ripped off, and I think that's the most important thing. You'll probably walk away with a pretty good deal, and you'll be happy with the car that you got.
One more thing I want to ask you about. I'm out here in California, so obviously there's a little bit of a different perspective on things from a lot of my fellow man, especially when it comes to politics. But the politics seeps into a lot of other areas, and cars is one of them. Because out here it seems like almost like a virtue signal to drive a hybrid or an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of saving money on gas, but there's a lot of factors there. So I mean, do you think that there is a certain value in an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, or is this something that is more sort of a feel-good thing for a lot of people?
Well, with electric cars, no, you can't make any valid economic argument, in my opinion, for an electric car. The very least expensive of them, I think, is the Nissan Leaf, and that one sells for about $30,000. That is a lot of money to spend on a car. Gas is about $2 a gallon right now. You can get yourself a nicely equipped, brand-new Toyota Corolla for about $16,000. So how much gas could you buy for $16,000, $15,000, which would be the difference between what you pay for a Corolla versus a Nissan Leaf?
Gotcha.
You're never going to come out ahead. That's the economic thing. The other thing is, functionally, the Nissan Leaf and all of the electric cars have significant functional liabilities. Most of them have very limited ranges relative to a conventional car, and that's a big problem. But an even bigger problem is their refueling, really their recharging times, which best case scenario, if you have access to what they call a fast charger, which is a high voltage charger, very best case scenario is 30 to 45 minutes to put 80% charge back in the batteries. Now, contrast that with the less than 5 minutes it takes to refuel a standard car. We live in a fast food culture. You tell me how many people are going to willingly put up with a car that best case scenario takes 30 to 45 minutes to regain 80% of its driving range.
Yeah, I mean, it might be one thing if you can just park your car at home for that charging, but not everybody's going to have that ability at their house. So usually you have to go find a charging station somewhere, which they are, at least in California, there's a good number of them, but you still got to go seek them out and take that time out of your day, which is, extremely valuable, especially like you said in today's culture.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge problem. It's one thing when you have a handful of these things in circulation, as is the case right now, and you've kind of got these cute little depots, in urban cores where there's, you can see them lined up. There's 6 little recharging slots. Well, what happens if there are large numbers of these electric cars out there? Think about a busy gas station and people lined up to get gas at a busy gas station. And there's throughput there at least, because each car takes less than 5 minutes to fuel up and move on its way. But imagine the queues that would form at these charging outlets where each car has to wait 30 to 45 minutes to juice up.
That does not sound like a fun time at all to me.
No, and another thing that's not mentioned often in the coverage of these cars, they are greatly affected by changes in temperature and also the use of accessories. For example, if you use the heater in an electric car, well, there's no internal combustion engine, which ordinarily provides the heat in a car. In an electric car, it's provided by electricity. The headlights, also, every accessory, the air conditioning, all of it is powered by electricity, and the batteries themselves, the performance is affected by changes in temperature differentials. Just like a regular car, it's harder to start it in the winter. Well, the same thing, that the electricity becomes drawn down more when it's cold outside or when it's hot. So these optimistic best case ranges all assume optimum conditions, whereas a standard car is much less affected by all of those things.
Now, Eric, when I first started shopping for a new car, one of the first things I did was head over to EPAutos.com. This is not a joke. It's not a fake plug. It's literally what I did because I've been reading your site for a few years now. And I started searching some of the vehicles that I was looking to test drive and read your reviews. And you review a tremendous number of vehicles over at EPAutos.com. So why don't you just take a minute now to just plug your website, let everybody know what you're doing over there. Like I said earlier, it's not just auto reviews and thoughts about cars. You also intermingle a lot of your political thoughts and that kind of thing. So why don't you give people the full layout of everything you're doing over there at EPAutos.com.
Oh, sure. We've got the new car reviews, which are based on my road tests and evaluations of the vehicle, and I try to put them in context relative to competitor vehicles and give a real-world description of how they perform and how they operate and what their pros and their cons are. And also, I incorporate articles about how the regulatory state and political considerations have been affecting car design and how that affects your pocketbook, what you have to pay as a result of that. We've also got articles about motorcycles, antique vehicles, car maintenance, pretty much anything under the sun that you can think of that has to do with cars or getting around. You should be able to find it there.
Great. Well, Eric Peters, I thank you so much for coming on the program. Before I let you go, you want to just put out how people can get in touch with you, how they can reach out and contact you, any social media contacts you might have? Feel free to give them the whole Eric Peters communication roundup.
Oh, sure. On the site, there are places where people can post questions, or they can email me directly. My email is not a secret. It's epeters952@yahoo.com. And I'm on Twitter at libertariancarg. They wouldn't give me Guy, so I got libertariancarg. That's me. Yeah. But I'm pretty easy to find if anybody would like to reach me.
All right, well, Eric Peters, I thank you so much once again for coming on the program today. Like I said, I do love your website. It's really my number one source when I'm looking for information about cars, so I highly recommend my listeners to go ahead and check it out. Keep up the great work, Eric. Keep on roaring.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.
All righty, folks. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with the great Eric Peters of EPAutos.com. Even if you don't care about libertarian politics, which I don't really know why you're listening to this program if you don't, EPAutos.com and Eric Peters is a great source for just researching vehicles. He test drives so many cars, has great detailed breakdowns of his experiences in each one, and I think his reviews are very unique when compared with a lot of the reviews you will get on a lot of the generic car websites and that kind of thing. So I want to really highly recommend checking out EPAutos.com once again for any sort of car research that you're into, as well as for Eric's thoughts on politics. You can find it all over there at EPAutos.com. We will, of course, link to that in the show notes for today's program, which can be located at lionsofliberty.com/272. And maybe I was a little greedy here because I'm shopping for a new car, so I kind of just wanted to get some tips from Eric. So I figured if I'm going to do that, I may as well record it and make a show out of it for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed our conversation, especially getting into a lot of the ways that the government has influenced the current cars that we see on the market. And folks, if you enjoyed this program, one way that you can help us kind of tick our way up in the podcasting world is to do a few things. You can head over to iTunes, especially iTunes, even if you don't listen to the program through there, and leave us a 5-star rating and a great review. That is a very easy, simple way that you can help us promote the show and get it in front of more people. Those ratings and reviews are a huge part of how iTunes chooses to promote shows, advance them through their rankings. So that is the number one way you can help us. The other way, of course, is just sharing it with your friends and family. Share our episodes from our Facebook page, facebook.com/Lions of Liberty. You can retweet all our stuff from Twitter at Lions of Liberty, or just email the show to a friend or family and say, hey, I don't know if you're interested in politics, but I know you're interested in cars, so you might find this episode pretty interesting. There's so many different ways you can approach the ideas of liberty and get people first thinking about them. And everybody's got an interest in cars in some level, whether they're a classic car enthusiast like my father is, or whether they're just someone who needs to get to work every day. Just about everybody out there can use some car buying tips now and again. So a great episode to share with people. Another great episode to share with people is our Liberty Draft. Anyone in the Liberty movement is going to have interest in this program. It was back in episode number 269 just a couple weeks ago. That was part 1, where we did our first 7 rounds of drafting our own Liberty propaganda teams with our eyes set on the 2020 election cycle. Well, guess what? Part 2 is coming up this Wednesday. That's right. We're going to do 3 supplemental rounds. We might even have some trades. Who knows? And then we're going to make our teams and put our players, so to speak, into different Liberty positions and debate them. And then we will find a way for you guys to contribute your thoughts and grade our teams. So look forward to that, the Liberty Draft. And if you checked out that last show, I encourage you, we want to get this thing trending. We want to blow this thing up. So use the hashtag, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, use the hashtag Liberty Draft when talking about the show. You can tweet about who your favorite picks were, who you think fell too far, who you think should have been drafted that wasn't. But just be sure to use that hashtag Liberty Draft and help us get this thing trending. Until next time, folks, live long and live free.